Today's talk, as you all know, is on sustaining biodiversity for human survival. It's generally an introduction to biodiversity, and instead of just talking about the richness of the diversity and what all we have in different parts on this planet, instead of that, I would be talking more on how biodiversity is linked to our life and our sustainability of this planet in terms of how we look at development, and I will also touch upon areas where how our use of resources have affected the biodiversity with some very good examples. And then finally, towards the end of the talk, I will try to put in uh, how do we involve ourselves into saving biodiversity, sustaining biodiversity, and also helping conservation of natural resources. So that would be the citizen science part, which we would develop further in the series of lectures that Hope Nature Trust is planning. So as we all know, biodiversity is something which all of us now talk. It has also gone into the national economics now. Biodiversity is no longer considered as just a wealth of nature resources. It is also now considered as part of the national wealth. So in many countries, they have started counting that as a part of their GDP of that nation. Uh, Now, this is a very interesting emblem that I saw way back, long back, around in the early 80s when I started into nature. I was so fascinated by this emblem. This was in 1972 that this group made this emblem, wherein very nicely they have linked up development, natural resource, and conservation. And beautifully, they have pictured it so very nicely that the nature is there is a sun, there are hills around and beautiful background, and in that there is a road going. So it is talking about development in terms of saving natural resources. Something which we all want to do is sustainable development. This picture I just wanted to start with you to share with you, so that this is something that I got very much impressed when I saw this particular emblem of this Color County Resource Conservation Center. Now, human beings are also one of the elements of biodiversity, because we don't talk about just wildlife, we talk about biosphere, where human being, their culture, their diversity also comes into the context of biodiversity on this planet Earth. Now, biodiversity, the word was coined way back in 1985. It's actually combination of biological diversity, and it talks about all the variety of life on on this planet, both in terms of its form and also in terms of its interaction. So we are talking not only just the size and shapes and all that, we are also talking about the interaction. So biodiversity is not just the species. It is the interaction of the species is also involved in biodiversity. The biodiversity can be considered at very, very different level. There is genetic biodiversity, there is species biodiversity, there is diversity at community level, there is diversity at ecosystem level, and there is diversity in human cultures. And all this comes on this living planet. Now, if you try to put biodiversity in a very philosophical way, I mean, then you can talk about, which is very, very deep. I mean, this is very important for us to also understand this definition of biodiversity. It is the knowledge learned by evolving species over millions of years about how to survive through the vastly varying environmental conditions Earth has experienced. It's basically talking about evolution. It's talking about adaptations to the new change that is happening on this earth. And this evolution being genetic, it is transmitted from one generation to the other. So it is actually the genetic knowledge that the species accumulate over millions of years of the evolution. And that is what we see as biodiversity today. So it's knowledge. It's actually a knowledge gained out of adaptation and evolution. And therefore, many experts today say that what we are doing to biodiversity today is actually we are burning the library of life. Now, this is a very in-depth meaning in this. I mean, the library of life. That's what is biodiversity would mean actually. Now, how is it linked to human survival? Now, people in towns and village, I mean, cities, we know wildlife as what we see on the television, but in reality, we all know that it's the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat are all biodiversity. They're related to biodiversity. So there is obvious link between the human lifestyle, human life, and biodiversity, and some of which are very, very obvious, like without plants, we don't get oxygen, or without bees we don't which to pollinate our flowers we will not get fruits and nuts. So but there are also some not so obvious relationships, like coral reefs and mangrove swamps protect us from cyclones and tsunami. Similarly, trees can absorb air pollution in urban areas. Now these are not so obvious relationship that we have with biodiversity in terms of our survival, but some relations are very bizarre. Like, for example, the tropical tortoise and spider monkeys disperse seeds of very tall, dense hardwood trees, which actually remove carbon dioxide from our climate and they protect us from climate change. So then, are tortoises and spider monkeys not related to climate change control? Of course they are. So this is a very bizarre, but not very. It's a very far stretched relationship, but that relationship definitely exists. Definitely, it exists in this biodiversity. Similarly, we can talk about the line-tailed macaques of the Shola forest of the southern tip of Western Ghats are very much involved in helping the onset of our monsoon, because they are the ones who disperse the seeds of those tall trees. So line-tailed macaques surviving in the Shola forest gives us rainfall. This is another bizarre relationship. Bizarre in, of course, inverted commas, but these long-distance relationship exist in the entire planet, the living planet. Now, this interaction is also part of biodiversity. We talk about biodiversity hotspots. I mean, these are very common terms, and actually many of us look at hotspots as something. Oh, this is a very rich biodiversity zone. Actually, hotspots are a negative connotation of what is happening to biodiversity. Now, these are the hotspots that we have all over the world, and in India, we also have hotspots. So, biodiversity hotspots is defined. It was the ecologist Norman Mayers in 1988 who coined this word, biodiversity hotspot. According to him, it is the biogeographical region with exceptional vegetation endemism, plant being endemic, and therefore, and they are having severe stress of habitat loss. So actually, biodiversity hotspot has to be looked at as places which are severely having habitat loss, and they need to be importantly conserved at the most urgent basis. So actually, biodiversity hotspot means we have biodiversity hotspots in India is not a big, a gain for our nation. It's actually that we are not protecting our habitat. So if you see, we have lots of biodiversity hotspots in India, like the Himalayas, the Indo-Burban zone, the entire area, that's the Northeast Meghalayas and all those areas. Then the Sundaland, that's the Andaman Islands, which are continuous with the Malayan archipelago. The Sundalands are actually on the top of the Sunda shelf, which is the continental shelf of India extended downwards. And the seawater there is just about 100 meters. And on this, we have around more than 1,000 islands which form the Malayan archipelago. And one of the most dense biodiversity on earth is in those tropical forests. Sumatra and Borneo being the most hotspots in this biodiversity. So that's one hotspot. And then, of course, our Western Ghats. Now, this particular graph that you are seeing here are seeing all those red zones. These are more dangerous than the hotspots. I mean, they are the spots where there is so much of invasion of non-endemic species, introduced species, and even foreign species. So these are actually the invasion hotspots that we have. That means not only these habitats are under threat due to habitat loss, pressures of development, and so on, but at the same time, there is pressure of invading species that are coming into this place. Am I okay? Hello?
Yes, Shashi. Yes,
Yeah,
Shashi.
yeah, yeah.
Sir, Little louder if you
You
can be little.
okay? Okay. Now is that fine?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
If you look at now biodiversity and human life, the relationship, it's a very, as I told you, that the relationship is very subtle, and some are very obvious, some are not so obvious, and some are very extended relationship. But they do exist. Now, what we need to understand is the countless number of interaction that is happening in the ecosystems that have evolved over millions of years. So you cannot create a forest, because forest has come out of interactions of millions of years between the species, between the communities within that forest region. Similarly, if these interactions are allowed to continue undamaged, and then we would see a healthy system, and that would give us a healthy sustainable planet. Now this is what we are planning to do when we say biodiversity conservation, that we allow the interactions that is happening in these ecosystem to continue uninterrupted. Then how they come into human welfare. Now you get, biodiversity gives us new medicine. Now I'm giving you very close relation, I mean examples, like the fungus that grows on the hairs of the sloth, which is a mammal, arboreal mammal, has been found to have chemicals which are very potent in curing cancer. In fact, they are extracting this nowadays, and one or two companies have even, been able to synthesize these chemicals. Then wild species of our own crop plants which are available in the forest, they are having genes which allow them to be salt tolerant. They have genes that allow them to be water, scarce tolerant, that means drought resistance. Now if we can remove these genes out and put it into our crops, we can develop new varieties of crops, and these have become such a prime importance now with the threat of climate change looming on us. And therefore a lot of countries, including WHO, including the UN, are trying to build up the traditional knowledge, wild species, and enhancing them so that they could be our future, uh, you know uh, uh, and assurance against food scarcity. So food security is something that would be given by our wild species that we have in our forest. Then we have a lot of ecosystem services. Now if you look at the cost of that, it is twice the world's GDP that these biodiversity is giving us in terms of the ecosystem services. Now Europe has lost huge amount of biodiversity due to war, due to so many other factors. And according to them, their own economists, that they are spending about 2% of their GDP to overcome this ecosystem service loss. And they are doing it by themselves. So it's a huge amount of money that they are spending because they don't have the ecosystem services from good biodiversity. So each species is unique. It's a natural work of art and cannot be recreated once they are lost. This is the most important thing, and we all agree that this is true. Now, as I told you, the wild species that are surviving in our forests, which are part of our biodiversity, is going to help us as a food security for future. I'll give you some classic example. Now, here is a tree which is called as the desert date, and it is an African tree. And the fruits of this are the nuts of these trees are used for extracting oil. Now, this oil has some phytochemicals which allow the locals who use this oil to get malaria resistance. And what has been found by scientists is that those families who have been using this oil for several years and has this practice of using this oil, they have a natural resistance to malaria. And this oil is therefore such an important local culture factor for their own survival in that place. So if they use some other oil, this particular resistance that they have developed will not be available. So this is a very interesting thing. Similarly, if you look at this particular local root, which is again an African root, which is found in Ghana, and a lot of areas, people, the tribals and local communities eat this. This is supposed to be the alternative for our potato. The taste is good, and people have started cultivating it, and in some countries they are even enhancing the production of this as a alternative to potato. Then there is this Citrullus colocynthus, a very beautiful melon family fruit, which grows in absolute arid conditions. Imagine that this can be grown in our deserts, and the people in the deserts can use this as a source of very succulent fruit. Now, this is a very good example. Now, this is also being tried by our agriculture universities to enhance it and also spread it in most of our arid and drought prone areas. Then Minus luteus, it's a very common plant, grown again, found in some of these African and Asian areas, and they can be used as lettuce. The leaves are equally very flavorful, and they grow very easily in arid climate. They don't require so much of irrigation. So this is another important thing, that these are wild plants, and we need to enhance and we need to encourage the use of these plants so that we have a source to look at when the future for food scarcity. And the last one is an excellent replacement for our groundnut. This is also an underground legume, and it gives you nuts which have similar flavor and taste like our groundnut. And in fact, there is a lot of countries who have started growing this to replace the groundnuts and peanuts, because sometimes peanuts require a lot of irrigation. This does not require, because it grows very well in less water scarce areas. So you find that the use of wild species and preserving them in our wild habitats does help us in going back to them and look forward to using them as alternative to our general crops, which are anyway very difficult to grow, needs fertilization support, needs irrigational support, and many times the climate fail us, and these plants are already evolved to survive those kinds of scarce conditions. Here is another example, the Coex lochrima jovi. And I love this plant. I've eaten this rice in some tribal villages, and it really tastes well. In South India, they are regularly used. Even in some Konkan region, people use this. This is the Jobson steer plant, and this is now claimed to be the most potential plant to replace the staple rice in many countries. In fact, in Thailand, and they have started Indonesia and all that, they have really started cultivating this as an intercrop with other crops in the farmlands, and they are really harvesting them commercially. In fact, Indonesian agriculture department has even started modern cultivation of coex as a replacement for their rice, because rice plants there are infested with a lot of fungus and fungal infections, and a lot of plants get affected, and the crop loss is quite high. So this has more resistant way. Now here is another example. In our own country, the mithun is now being touted to be the replacement for our cattle. With the beef ban, Northeast India found out very difficult to survive without the beef, and they have now come out that why not use mithun. They were using mithun, and mithun beef meat is much tender, more tasty than the beef, and the leather out of the mithun is supposed to be of a better quality than our cattle. Now recently, just last year, FSSI has started this a process of giving license to mithun meat, and probably this year I think it should come out. And once that comes out, this would be a good replacement and a good source of protein for the highland people. So this is again for wild species, which is giving us a replacement for our own cattle. Now, Professor Edward O. Wilson, he's identified as the father of biodiversity. In 1985, he wrote a very nice piece. He says each higher organism is richer in information than a Caravaggio painting or a Bach fuge or any other great work. Now, what does he mean by this? Is again,
उद्या संध्याकाळीचा प्लॅनिंग आहे पण आम्ही मी सांगू शकत नाही.
1 minute. Yeah. Continue.
What he's talking about is again adaptation, evolution, genetic information being stored as the organisms become higher in evolutionary ladder. Now, Michelangelo Merci, who used to write his name as Caravaggio because of his village. He was one real-time Italian artist who the realistic paintings, you should watch his paintings to know how realistic they are. He actually developed his style based on all the senior painters during his time and before his time, actually evolved by learning the information from exactly like evolving what animals do to adapt to environmental stress. Similarly, Sebastian Bach, he also did the same thing. He started this huge from very simple notes of music, and he built it on all the music that was available at that time from all maestros who was living before him. Now all of them have used information that was already available with the few earlier generation and adapted them to a newer form and made it more bigger. Now that's what is happening as every animal evolve and adapt. So that's why he used this in his definition of understanding biodiversity. Now, that's a very nice way of putting it by Professor Edward O. Wilson. Now, we all know that there is a mind-boggling diversity. Now, if you look at even the basic diversity of the species level, there's about 1.7 million species have been identified, but we are expecting that to go up to 100 million, if possible, if we can identify them. Now, maximum biodiversity is in the tropic, as I told you. Borneo, in 37 acres of land, you would find 700 species of tree, which is much more than almost equivalent to the number of species of trees that you see in North America. Now, that's the kind of high density of biodiversity in these places. And then you pick up any spoonful of soil from where we get our food, you will find about 10,000 to 50,000 species of bacteria, depending on from where you have picked up the soil. Now that's a mind-boggling diversity. Now this is what we call a diversity of life, but they are all under mammoth pressure. Pressure due to what? Pressure due to our population, an increasing population, and there is less land because land what we have is limited, but our numbers are increasing. Now, if you look at India itself, almost 50% of land is used for cultivation. That's a huge amount of, and already we have used up our resources to a great amount. Now, is this the right way to go ahead? Is this the right way to sustain our biodiversity? That's a question that we'll have to answer ourselves. Now, why this has happened has been a great neglect. If you look at, I've given you some comparative account from 1960 to 2017, that in Bombay, how the forest cover has changed, at Delhi, how the forest cover has changed, Coimbatore, Jaipur, Nagpur, Bhavnagar, and of course Bangalore. Now, if you look at these main cities, you find it is pathetic how they have lost the forest cover. In some cities, there is an increase, but it is very, very marginal. Now, this is how we have been making a big neglect to our beautiful natural resources. If you look at the world land use, India is very high in using it for crops. Whereas you find it in Brazil or Sweden, it is more of forest. Now, this is a very important thing. Now, if you look at planet Earth, we talk about all these things. Look at planet Earth. What are we doing? We all know that we are having 30% of land, 29% to be specific, and about 71% of ocean. Now, what we are using as our resources in all these 30% of land, and what are we doing? We are having 10% in locked up in ice, so we cannot go there. 19% are barren. 71% of that 30% is what we are living on and using it for our production. And how are we doing it? 50% of it we are putting in agriculture and 37% in forest. 1% is in shrubs, 1% is built up because it is our land, and then 1% is in fresh water. Now, if you look at how we are using it, agriculture, we are using about 77% of that land for livestock, which is giving us 37% of protein supply, whereas 23% of it is used for crops, and we are getting 63% of proteins from there. Now see how lopsided is our use of land for agriculture. Animal husbandry is taking up huge land, but actual agriculture is using less land but giving us more protein. Now that's why now there is a huge debate, or in fact people claiming that non-vegetarian lifestyle is more burdensome to the earth. This is one of the main reasons. I'm not going to that discussion at all. I'm just making a mention here. Now, if you look at the forest cover changes again, you will find most of the states in our country has lost a lot of forests. Whenever you say 0.2% law, I mean, 2% loss or 0.01% loss, it is in hectares. So please remember the huge amount of forestry we are talking about, even if it is a 0.1% fall. And what you find is only Kerala, which has made a little bit progress by increasing its forest cover by 2%. Now, if you look at all the industries which we are using the forest land, you will find mining using the maximum. And recently, government has cleared a lot of lands for mining. Without mining, we do understand that our developmental projects, industries cannot sustain, but there has to be some kind of sustainability even in mining. That's something which we need to also look at very seriously. One way of looking at how good are we in resource utilization and management is to just look at our solid waste management. So let's have a look how we do our solid waste management. That tells us how good are we in using natural resources either wastefully, and how do we manage our waste. That's another aspect. Now, I'm just taking US as an example because they are supposed to have the maximum solid waste production. You will find that they have a huge increase as compared to 1960 to 2010. And there is a 35% recycling which they do. Now, if you look at their per capita generation, you will find that in 2017, they actually reduced it because there has been a huge educational awareness of people using recyclable material, recycling the material, and so on. So therefore the per capita solid waste production has actually reduced there, but otherwise it is a world comparison, they are still very high. Now look at India. We produce about half a kg of solid waste per person. That's roughly the same even today. And we spend about 1,500 rupees per ton to dispose. Our collection efficiency is very varied. In some places, it's hardly 50%, even less than that. And in some cities and urban areas, it is almost 90% collection. But disposal is pathetic. 95% of our waste is put on landfills and only 5% is put into compost. This is a huge loss and it's a huge waste of waste. Then if you look at the tier 2 and tier 1 cities in India, you will find that about 0.5 kg is our per capita production in Mumbai. Chennai has little higher production of solid waste. Nagpur has very low. And if you find that among all these solid waste that we generate, about 20% can be recycled, whereas 85% of it cannot be. They are just burned because they are not even recycled, not even considered of you reusing. Levi said that it is just burnt. Now, if you compare our solid waste that we generate over the years, let's see how we have changed our lifestyle. So I have a comparison from 1996 to 2015. You find a very interesting change. You know, biodegradables are generally looking at the same, that we have come into around 50%. That's because of our lifestyle and little bit change in our food style. That can be accepted. But see the amount of paper that has come up. It's almost, 5 times what we used to do in 1996. Similarly, plastic and rubber is almost 10 times. But our collection efficiency has increased because we have become very efficient in collection. Almost 70% of our waste is collected. Now there is a big malady which has come up, that's the e-waste. Now if you see the increase in e-waste from 2005 to 2015, again it is almost 10 times. And if you look at the cities who produce, just Mumbai and Delhi together produces almost 45% of the e-waste. And even today we don't have a very good policy of disposing and managing e-waste. This is another big problem, and this is not going to help us in sustaining our biodiversity. So this is one aspect. Now because most of the reasons of our biodiversity wastage and habitat loss and absolute callous attitude towards conservation, callous attitude towards natural resource usage is because of NIMBY, not in my backyard. We all are very happy to make our houses very clean, our backyards very clean, but whatever we clean in the backyard goes into a nearby waste dump. And then we don't mind the neighborhood getting spoiled, but our backyard and our house should be clean. As long as it is not in my backyard, I'm not bothered. And that is what I'm going to deal with in the further part of my talk. Now, this is what we do. We take all our waste from a house and dump it in the nearby river. We don't mind the river getting spoiled, but our house should be clean and neat. That's the typical NIMBY attitude. Now, let's look at some case studies. Let's look at Dadar Chowpatty. Now, I'm using this as because I was involved in this particular case, because I was one of the petitioner going to Supreme Court for this particular cause. Now let's look at Dadar Chowpatty. Dadar Chowpatty has a beautiful beach. Now this is it's a shot almost taken some 25-30 years back, and you will find, you can see the Sea Rock Hotel here and see the beach, which is so beautiful. There is Chena and all these sellers just here. People are enjoying. The beach is very beautiful. There are horses running. Everything is happening like a Bombay typical city beach. Now what has happened today? This has come up. We are so proud that the Worli Bandra ceiling, one of the most important architectural monument that we have today, a splendor, an achievement across the nature and nature's power, and we have built it, and we are all very proud about it. And Mumbaikas are very proud about it. Now, I was one of the petitioners against this Worli Bandra ceiling. Now I'll tell you again how this NIMBY attitude has made this project such a huge loss and loose burden on our natural resources and biodiversity and habitat loss specifically. I'll just explain to you why I've been bringing this point today. Now, this is the genesis of that project that was not allowed to be built from 1987. There was a plan to build it, and there were so many committees and reports. I'm not going to the detail of it. And then finally the clearance came in 2000, almost in 2000, 1999 actually. They gave, and the complete structure started coming up in all its administration and engineering drawing and everything started coming up in 2000. Now if you look, World Bank had given us money, almost 8,000 crores for our metropolitan urban transport project. Now, when they did this, when they gave this money, they had gone through all the previous reports. They themselves had a survey, and very beautifully they had suggested that the 72% of this should go for development of railway in Mumbai, 21% should be for highway, and bus and waterway ferries should be 7%. There was no priority given to flyovers and sea link. This is the most important thing of this MUTP money that we got from World Bank, which all was getting used up in this particular project. Now, why did they say this? They had a beautiful survey which said that in Mumbai, 4% of the road is used by buses, 4% of the road space, but it carries 51% of our commuters. Similarly, taxis and rickshaws take about 12% of the road, and they carry 32% of our commuters. And whereas private vehicles, they carry 84% of the road space, and only 17% commuters travel by that. This is a colossal wastage of natural resource, and we are all part of it, including me. Those, we are all private car owners, we are all part of it. I'm not blaming anyone about it beyond it. I also accept this, but this is the truth, that even then government was very keen that the Worli Bandra Shillong should be built, and they really built it. Now I'm telling you about the story of that building. Now this is Mahim Bay. Now Mahim Bay is a very typical, bay with the water coming from the Worli end. This is the Worli end, and this is the Bandra end. So the water comes at an angle from the Worli end and fills the bay. So the water comes from here, and then it fills and it goes out like this. Now part of this water filling into the bay enters through the small channel into the Mahim Creek, and that's where it fills up the mangroves and goes right up to the BT River beyond the BKC that we know today. Now that's the normal flow of this particular, Mahim Bay water, and there is a huge channel of water going, huge amount of water flows in. Now, what these people did was they reclaimed part of the mouth of the creek because they wanted to have a pump here so that the water can be removed, and then they also reclaimed this portion because they wanted to make a ramp which will go to that Furli Bandra ceiling. Now, because of this, what happened was the water flow got absolutely bottlenecked, and the water flowing into the creek started reducing. And in fact, we started seeing, uh, that time even BKC was not even built, and we saw that many of the mangroves towards the BKC end were all dying because the water was not reaching the upper parts of the mangrove. So that is how we started shouting, I mean, you please open the creek, open the creek. There's not enough water coming into the Mahim Creek. That's very, very important. And then what happened? The water started piling up on this side. And then suddenly all the people who were staying along the seashore, right from the other Chowpatty towards Hinduja Hospital, everyone started shouting because they couldn't sleep at night when there is high tide, because the water was hitting right into the beach very loudly, because a huge pile up of water was happening because nothing was getting into the Mahim Creek. Now, this is when we said that this particular project needs to be relooked. Please don't put it up. And when then it went to the Supreme Court. Now let's see what happened. The sea link was supposed to be a cable stayed bridge with a suspension. Now, this is the first design that they gave, and we were all happy. Even I was very happy because it is a single cable stayed bridge with one pillar at Worli and one pillar at Mahim end, and then you have a single pillar here, absolutely nothing in between. So there was free flow of water. There is nothing wrong in the Mahim Creek water being recycled and so on. Now, they initially agreed for this design, but then they realized that they don't have money. The Maharashtra government didn't have money to support this, and therefore, but they wanted the bridge, they wanted the ceiling. It was a prestige issue. So what they did was they changed the design and they made it only half a kilometer. Initially, it was 1.5 kilometer ceiling. Now it is only half. Even the latest, the current
Shashi,
design.
Shashi,
Yeah.
1 second. 1 second. Dr. Ganesh, can you put off your mic, please? Dr. Ganesh
Yes, yes,
Margan.
yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, so because of lack of money, the ceiling design was changed, and from 1.5 kilometer long bridge, it became half a kilometer bridge. Now, today's bridge that you see is a half a kilometer bridge. Then what happened to the 1 kilometer on either side? They built ramps and they built all these pillars on which the ramp is now stuck. Now, this is something that was horrible for ecologically sustainable design, and we were against it. Now, what you see is the pillars on top, but below the pillars, because the sea has to be, I mean, the pillars have to be actually erected, the foundation is very large. And that is where we were saying that the water flow is going to be very badly affected. And now what happened is, and then you see what kind of diagrams they gave. This is the map which I got it from MSRDC website. And can you see any mangrove here? Nothing. They realized that this sea link is going to kill all these mangroves, and they were happily going to reclaim this entire land. You can imagine how much of land would have gone. Now, this is something that made me also feel so bad for this particular project, and we all went. About 16 of us went to Supreme Court. Supreme Court said that, oh, you have your points very right, but see, that sea-link is for the common man. It is for public transport, so we cannot stop it. They will take precautions to minimize the environmental impact, but the ceiling has to be built, and we lost our case.
Shashi, we have lost your voice. Shashi, you are not audible. I think he has lost the connection. Let us wait for some time. He's connecting back. Just a second. I had rang him up.
Okay, I'll just come back.
Yes, yes, Shashi, we can hear you. Please share your.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I am. Okay, so this is what I was. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible and visible too. Continue. Please continue.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so this is the ceiling that I was talking about with lot of pillars. And then now see what has happened to the flow. Now the water has coming in very small amount because of those ramp. The flow is further reduced, and the water coming into the Mahim Creek has become lesser and lesser. And today what we have seen is what we have seen is that the actual way of natural cleaning process that used to happen in the Mahim Bay has gone down. And also the sewage that is coming from the end of lot of pollution. If you just take a fisherman's boat and go up to the Worli ceiling, you will realize there is very bad smell in the Mahim Bay. Now what did we get after all these things? We got a clover leaf connection, one of the best in Mumbai, only one in Mumbai. So the clover leaf junction was there, which many people said, oh, beautiful design of traffic control. And then we got a promenade, which I would call beauty in beast. For what? And now what we lost was a beautiful beach. Now this is Mahim Chowpatty just at the beginning when the ceiling was being built, and then it lost. It became so much because of so much of siltation happening. And then during high tide, the water is coming so much high that it hits the Ambedkar's, the memorials that the government is planning to build a wall, extend the promenade from Worli to Bandra, something like you will have a marine drive replicated at Dadar. Now, why should I lose such a beautiful beach where I, as a child, has swam and taken bath? Why did we lose such a beach? For what? Do would we call this development? Today 70 rupees is a toll which commonly runs public transport. How many BST buses go on that? The answer is with you. Now this is what our attitude is, that we never bother what is happening and how it is happening, and then once it comes into our backyard we don't understand that we should stop it at the beginning when it is happening. Now, I'll give you another example. Oil palm cultivation in Malaysia. Malaysia is within that tropical biodiversity. Good coffee cultivation. They had rubber cultivation, rubber plantations lost in between because of the replacements of synthetic material, and therefore there was a huge fall in their economy. People started becoming poor. Poverty was increasing. The nation had to do something. They said, okay, somebody gave them idea of oil palm plantation, and in the early 70s they introduced oil palm plantation technology into Malaysia, and it became such a big success that today all over the world, if you see the supply of palm oil, Malaysia and Indonesia together supplies almost 85%. It's a huge industry there. More than 6 to 10 lakhs of people are working in that oil plantation. But what did they do to the biodiversity? You can see the photograph here in Borneo. Forests, primary forests have been cut down. Rich tropical forests have been cut down and they are getting replaced with oil palms. Now, since just last 3 or 4 years, they changed their forest policy, and then now there is a slight reduction in the forest being destroyed. Otherwise, it was rampant. They almost lost 50% of their biodiversity in just one decade. It's a huge loss. So I'm giving that example of Malaysia. Now, so they started doing that, and in 2011, 62% of the nation's export was only oil. So that was the kind of production that we were making, and the in 2000 to 2012, Malaysia was recorded to have the highest deforestation rate amongst all nations of this world. Now, if you look at the oil palms, you will find the wild inhabitants are not only there. Now, only inhabitants who are found in this oil palms are generally species which have got very low conservation interest. 34% of reduction in species is found due to oil palm cultivation or plantations, and as compared to forests, so almost 63% of the organisms are not. So almost 80% of animals who are seen in the forest are not seen in palm habitats. Then, what is the reason? There is pure ground vegetation. Litter is not there. There is no litter, and palm the canopy does not cover the land very properly, so there is no shade. So the temperature of the surface soil is so high that the entire biodiversity of the soil is changed, and that changes the entire topography of that place. Now that's the biggest problem. You can see the extent to which they were expanding the oil from 1975 to 2013. They had excellent coconut production. They were highest in cocoa. They were also highest in rubber. Rubber, of course, fell off because of other synthetic material. But cocoa and coconut, they just killed the industry by replacing it with oil palm. And then what did they get? They eliminated 48 to 60% of bird species from these plantation places. Small mammals that were found in the plantations are only rata species. Borneo, 50% of the individual leopard territory is now falling in oil palm plantation. Can you imagine? Borneo is one of the richest biodiversity spots in this world. It's almost next to Brazil. Then there is 54% of reduction in butterflies in all plantation places. Ants and termites in plantation areas are so less because the soil is so hot and they cannot survive. There is no leaf litter and the climate becomes dry in that plantation. And the soil temperature in this plantation is so high and there is absolute lack of cover. And therefore, entire species diversity is lost due to these oil plantations. Now that's what Malaysia did, and now they have realized. So they changed their forest policy. They have made a new conservation policy. Now slowly it is coming back. Slowly, it will still take time. Lot of people awareness is to be brought up, and people are doing it. That also we will try to see now later. I'll try to now fasten my talk. Now, what has happened to protected areas? That's again one of the reasons of our habitat use is the protected areas have become isolated. one best example is Indian elephant. And our elephant populations are so isolated, there is lot of human conflicts because the elephant corridors are gone. Their natural path of migration is all now interspersed with villages and towns. Now this is the elephant corridors, elephant population that we have in India. Now in this we have identified huge amount of corridors that need to be built up into 4 areas which government is now trying to build. Now here is an example of these red dots are the ones where we need corridors immediate, urgent basis we need corridors so that the populations can migrate. Otherwise the conflicts will be very high. We will be using elephants in the coming decade. Then this is a very good example of WWF doing a very good project in Kerala, and they came out with elephant corridors in Wayanad district 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. With these 5 corridors being protected and allowing the elephants to walk through these corridors, the elephants can migrate from Karnataka to Tamil Nadu to Kerala and back to Karnataka. Now, this would have been a beautiful thing for surviving our elephant population of South. They are trying to work it out. A lot of problems with local people, land acquisition, land replacement, and re-inhabiting the people. All those issues need to be looked at, but this is how it has to be done. Same is migratory pathways of our migrant birds. Now, all these black stars that I have put here, they are Ramsar sites. They are very good sites, and therefore there are birds coming in. But in between these, there are during the flight paths, lot of birds take rest. And these resting areas are also equally important. So these circles that you see are additional sites that need to be protected if we have to save these flyways. Now, here is another example where flyways have to be protected because of international cooperation. Like we need cooperation with Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Russia to save this flight path. Now, this kind of international level cooperation is needed to save these flight paths. Now, we have to change our foreign policy as far as natural resources are to be conserved. Now, most important thing is that we need to encourage people participation. So there has to be socio-economic and socio-agro-economics to be linked, and then people should be protected. And direct payment should go to people who are doing ecosystem service. That's one very important thing that we need to do. Sweden does it. We need to start it in our, Africa has started it. We have to do this in India at a large scale. Then people have started now giving marks, organic marks, certification marks for plantations. What they do is they just check out water coming out from plantation, the effluent from plantation, if I can use that word. They just test that effluent and see what is the level of fertilizers, what is the level of chemical fertilizers, and label them as non-organic or organic. Now this has to be started in India in a long, very strong manner. Most of our organic certified plantations are not actually fully organic. So that we need to understand. Now, here is an example that we can have geographical indications for a lot of our crops and very important fruits that we generate. We need to give them geographical indications like most of the European countries are doing it. We should now start doing it. Government has to invest in it, institute has to work on it, and then certify them. A very good example is this elephant coffee. Now, this plantation in Northeast are allowing elephants to come into their plantation. In fact, visitors can go and see the elephants are roaming freely in the tea plantation. And what they are doing is using that, they are calling it as elephant friendly coffee. And that coffee is sold 10 times higher than other brands of coffee, and people are buying it only because the label is there that this plantation is elephant friendly, and therefore this coffee is more eco-friendly. Now this kind of things have to be now done more and more so that people will be participating more and more in our biodiversity conservation. So landscape label is something that we need to introduce in our country. Now this is another example for similar to elephants. We need tiger corridors. Now this is how our tiger populations are, isolated. This is part of Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. Now, here is a good example that if you can have these green lines, which are the corridors, expected corridors, then a tiger from Tadoba can migrate very easily to Kana or directly to Melghat. So there is no problem in between. The area becomes much more easier for the tigers to roam around, and there would be less conflict with the human, which is happening today. Now, this is a very interesting project. You all can check it online. In Africa, you have an ecoexist project wherein all these policymakers, conservation biologists, ecologists, policymakers, organization, even financial organizations have come together for elephant conservation, elephant movements, elephant corridors, people participation in managing these corridors, and also people participation in managing elephant sanctuaries and national parks. Now, this is a very interesting and a very feasible model that they have developed. Such models need to be replicated in India with our regional expertise. Now, here is a very good example. Many times I hear people saying that the tribals, the local people are the ones who are against the conservation program and so on. Here is a classic example. If you deal with the local population in the right manner, in the right spirit, they all are positive to conservation. Now, here is an example where the Siju, the Siju Revak elephant corridor in Meghalaya. Now, this had to be cleared and the people had to give land so that this corridor could be built. And you won't believe, to 1,250 hectares of community land was kept aside by the villagers themselves. And then there was land purchases and voluntary relocations done by the people themselves. This was possible because a lot of NGOs and local leaders, panchayat, all of them worked together, and then the authorities themselves gave some power to the local people to help in the management of the corridor, and therefore there was community participation, and today that corridor is open and elephants are using it very happily. So here is that if you can utilize the local communities and make them participate in your program properly, they very well happily join because they understand the importance. And if they can get some return out of this corridor being given, they will jolly well do it. And that's exactly what they did in Meghalaya. Now they are planning to do it at other places to make up the other corridors which are also needed. Now, what is we are absolutely callous. We just don't look at wildlife as an important entity. Now that's very seen in our roads, railways, pipelines, power lines. It does not have any wildlife crossing. Now this is what happens. Most of wildlife gets stuck. They can't cross. And it is so pathetic to see that elephant calves have to jump across road barriers because they don't have crossings. But is it possible to give crossing? Yes, they are doing it in Canada and many other places. They have such corridors. They have underpasses for smaller mammals. So it's possible to do even in our place. Then we have very bad designs of our culvert. I remember we fighting so much with the conservator at Borivali National Park to change the culvert designs in Borivali. We had culverts which have these waterfalls, and therefore the fish migration was absolutely blocked. So we need to redesign these culverts, especially in forested places, so that the fish can very easily migrate. Now, this is a very simple design change that you have to do, and everything will work so beautifully. Now, this is where I say that our design architects are so callous about the design. They just solve the problem with an instant, with no opening of their outlooks to see what is happening to the environment. Is it that we cannot do it? We definitely can do it. We did it at Painch National Park. There is an underpass of 37 kilometers. It's all elevated road and wildlife passes through it. In fact, they have put cameras below this elevated road to check whether wildlife is, and they found tigers and many other animals are using it very easily now. And this elevated road was built with least problem disturbance to wildlife in terms of sound and also in terms of construction. So we have the technology. Why not we replicate in every wildlife areas in our country? We must do it. There are simple solutions also. Look at these canopy bridges that they have built in Chinar Wildlife Sanctuary, Idukki district, Kerala. 19 canopy bridges are there. Very simple canopy bridges which has been built by the locals. maintained by the locals, and they are paid for it. So they are jolly well happy to maintain all this, and you have wildlife using it, including squirrels. They are using it to cross, and that's one thing that we can. And most of the deaths have been reduced, which otherwise they get run over by the traffic. So if you look at it, we also have lost something in our backyard and we are not bothering about it. Where are our ponds? How many of us have actually heard the frogs croaking in this monsoon? We didn't even bother about it because we never bothered when the ponds went off. We didn't bother when the grasslands went off. We just allowed it. And where has the hedges gone? Hedges, which had so much of these garden calotes, their population has dwindled to such an extent we hardly see them. Why are we not worried about these small changes that is happening in our city? They are part of our biodiversity. Now, this is where we should start actually. So, we need to have sustainable development, which will not only give us economic growth, it will give us environmental protection and also social progress. Now, how can we do it? It has to be a collective effort of policies, social work, governance, politics, information exchange, and even economics. Everything has to look at conservation and development coming together so that there is sustainability. That's the entire solution for the entire matter. You look at development from a conservationist point of view, so there will be only it will become a sustainable development. What we need to do is a modification of lifestyle. Reduce our self burden. Just be sensitive to environmental issues, and therefore we can work through citizen science to bring this planet in more better way. Now, I'll just give you a short this to what is citizen science. Now, these are some of the crowdsourcing sites that are available where they help citizens to give information. Now, we should build one such thing with hope, and we should have one in Thane. That's my dream, and we must do it. There are a lot of such things. Earthwatch is there, eDiversity India is there, BioAtlas India is there. They're all active, and of course, Migrant Watch. All of them are accepting data from citizens. Now, you may ask, what is the value of citizen data? I'll give you an example. See this. This is done by citizens. What this is done, there is a website called Spot a Shark. Now, what they do is they just take photographs of divers going. There are these are all scuba divers who go down and investigate sunken ships and underwater structures and so on. And they are encouraged to take photograph of sharks. And they say, please upload your photographs on our site. And what they got was they analyzed these photographs. From these photographs, you can identify individual sharks because they have these brown marks on the sides, this species of the reef shark. And then they found that the same shark comes every year, and they have recorded this for almost 10 years, or different people photographing. And now they realize that the sharks prefer to come back to the same site year after year, and they have such a huge territory, and therefore preserving these small things, underwater structures, is so important for shark conservation. This came out because of citizens photograph. No scientific investigation. It's not impossible for a scientist to have worked for 10 years on one species of scarf. Same here. Here this what they did in Malaysia, to improve awareness, they started this butterfly count, which is called a peninsular butterfly count. And they did this on 16th June 2015. They have a Facebook website which is still active. They just published a paper on this in 2020. You can check it on Facebook, and they have photographs also. What they did was they gave butterfly kit to all those people who registered. They also asked them to collect butterfly legs. So you have to capture the butterfly and remove one leg, put it in a paper bag and send it. By removing one leg, you are not killing the butterfly. Neither the butterfly is affected by its lifestyle. It is a standard, scientifically accepted way of collecting DNA of butterfly. So they did this and they asked people, please do it. And you won't believe, 57 groups, they were counting groups were there, and they collected 220 butterfly legs in 26 localities. 87% of the legs could be given, they could extract usable DNA. So that means they're collection was not bad. Citizens are quite good in doing scientific work, and they counted 43 species. It's a very good thing. Now, citizen science therefore has lot of strength. It has to be tackled and harnessed in the right way. That's the point. Now, here is another example where citizen people, they actually surveyed 30 kilometer strip of Borneo, which was impossible for a scientific team to do. They did it in just 3 nights, and they did that, and from that they got 6 new beetle species, all of them tiny beetles found in leaf litter. This is one very good outcome of citizen science to science of modern world. Monarch butterfly migration. It's a beautiful citizen science activity of North America. Now, monarch butterflies travel large distance, so you need to understand the land use pattern. It is very impossible for scientists to do such a huge work. They need a lot of people. So, citizen science is the solution. You have to also look at the food plant of this monarch, that is a milkweed, how they are dispersed, and so on. So, there are about 13 monarch butterfly related citizen science groups in North America. They all did this, and what they did was that the experience of this can be now used for other species. Now, what did they do? Now, you can see this. This is the general migratory pattern of the monarch in spring and summer, the spring and fall. And then this is the number of citizen group that were providing information. You can see one part, the eastern part of North America was full of these people because that is a major migration path. There were a lot of other lesser migration path, as you can see here. Now those were covered by these citizen groups. Now if you look at the number of people who are giving data, you can see they are almost all throughout North America. Everybody was interested in monarch butterfly and they were giving data. They were also giving data on milkweed plants, how many are there, whether they are growing there, whether the growth is good or bad. So from this, the food availability also data was easily available, and the monarch butterfly migration also was studied. Now this is a very good thing, and now using that data, they are now conserving the land, and even some farmers have been told to cultivate milkweeds as part of their crop so that the monarch butterflies can survive. This is how citizen science can lead to a social movement to conserve biodiversity. Now, what about India? We also have very good examples. Now, this is a very classic example in a Bangalore village where they had a citizen science activity in 2000. They recreated the forest that they had lost, and through citizen science activity. Similarly, Ullaskaran, the famous tiger scientist, he has a citizen science group which is called Center for Wildlife Studies. Now, they use citizen science so that people who are attacked due to wildlife conflict areas and so on, their families in Nagarole and Bandipur, they get proper compensation. Now, that is done through citizen science. Now, there is another program which is called Seeds for Needs program, which is by Biodiversity International headquarters in Ethiopia. But we have Indian farmers working in that. We have Indian farmers contributing to that. What are they doing? They are taking new seeds, growing it in their farm, and giving feedback to this international. This is again citizen science. Now here is Migrant Watch. Migrant Watch has a beautiful program on pied-crested cuckoo, and all the reports of sightings of pied-crested cuckoo was collected, analyzed, and from there we came to know now that indeed pied-crested cuckoo actually comes before monsoon in India at various places at different times. And they could even say that how many days before monsoon the pied-crested cuckoo reaches that place. Now that could be found exactly, and a paper could be published because of citizen science coming out through the Migrant Watch program. So we need to have public engagement, and that's one of the major outcomes of citizen science. And now European Commission and many advanced science societies have taken this as a proper program that has to be done by any scientific program dealing with biodiversity. Now there's two parts to it. One is citizens are contributing to science and they are happy to contribute, and therefore they become participatory in again the conservation program that is developed out of the work that they themselves did. Now this kind of indebtedness comes through citizen science program, And this is exactly what we can do in Thane for our own biodiversity of Thane region. So what should we do? We should develop sensitivity to conservation to natural resources. We should be aware of environmental impacts. Remove that NIMBY attitude. Please change and then look at others. I mean, we ourselves must change. At least try to change. Make a small compromise. I am saying not to change completely, but at least compromise. Definitely make an attempt and reduce the wastage of natural resources. I think that's the best thing that we can do towards contribution towards biodiversity conservation. So, as Professor E.O. Wilson said in 1985, this, that is the earth, being the only living world that we are ever likely to know, let us join to make the most of it. Now, this call he made in 1985, today it is the most urgent thing that we need to do if we have to survive the humanity totally and save the biodiversity of this planet. Thank you.